17, a 5-year-old girl was rushed to the hospital in a desperate race against time. Her grandmother had called 911, her voice frantic, her words barely coherent. "She's not breathing. Please help." Beside her, her twin sister clung to life, pale and weak, her condition just as concerning. The medical team worked feverishly, running a battery of tests, blood samples, urine screenings, every possible clue. They needed answers. And then the results came back. What they found was beyond anything they expected. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't an illness, and it wasn't something they could simply fix. The toxicology report revealed a shocking discovery that would soon turn this tragic medical emergency into a criminal investigation. But how did this happen? Where were the parents? Why was the grandmother, the person meant to protect them, the one calling for help? And what secrets lay hidden in the days leading up to this devastating moment? The answers to those questions would unravel a story so unsettling, so heart-wrenching, it would leave everyone asking, could this have been prevented? Stay with me as we uncover the events of that fateful day and the chilling truths that came to light. This is a story of innocence lost, betrayal, and decisions that changed a family forever. Welcome, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories update. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. When the ambulance doors swung open, the paramedics rushed Nyla Andrews into the emergency room. Her small frame lay motionless on the stretcher, and the medical team sprang into action. Her heart had stopped, her eyes freezed, and every second mattered. The attending doctor immediately began chest compressions, while others prepared the defibrillator. The room was tense, the sounds of machines and hurried voices filling the air. Nearby, her twin sister, Nia Andrews, was placed on another stretcher. Though conscious, she was pale and visibly weak. Nurses worked quickly to insert an IV and assess her vitals. She clung to a small blanket, her movements slow, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. As Nila's condition deteriorated, the medical team fought relentlessly to revive her. The room was a blur of effort. Compressions, injections, and defibrillator shocks. But her heart wouldn't restart. Every attempt was met with grim expressions from the doctors, their efforts growing more desperate with each passing minute. Meanwhile, blood and urine samples from both girls were rushed to the lab for immediate analysis. When the results came back, they revealed something the medical team could hardly believe. Both children had dangerously high levels of oxycodone in their systems, a drug known for its potency and risk, especially in small children. The room grew quieter as the gravity of the situation set in. One of the nurses whispered to a colleague, "How could this happen?" The attending physician examined the report again, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. This wasn't an accident. The sheer concentration of the drug indicated something far more deliberate. As Nia was stabilized and moved to a critical care unit, the focus shifted to uncovering the truth. How did this happen? Why were these children exposed to such a substance? And what role did their caregiver play in this tragedy? The questions loomed large, but for now, one heartbreaking fact was undeniable. Nyla was slipping away, and no one could explain why. The attending physician, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger, immediately contacted the authorities. "This isn't accidental," he said to a nurse. "Someone gave these children those drugs." Within hours, the police arrived at the hospital, and Eunice Carver was taken into questioning. The investigation into Nyla Andrews' tragic death and Nia Andrews' critical condition was led by Detective Cameron Steele, a seasoned investigator known for her meticulous approach and unwavering determination. Steele, along with her team, arrived at the hospital within hours. What began as a routine inquiry into a medical emergency quickly evolved into a criminal case when the toxicology reports confirmed dangerously high levels of oxycodone in both twins. In the interrogation room, Eunice Carver sat nervously, her hands clasped tightly. Steele wasted no time, her tone firm yet calm. "Eunice, we need to understand what happened to your grandchildren. Did you give them any medication?" Eunice shook her head quickly, her voice defensive. "No, I would never do anything to hurt them. They must have gotten into something. I don't know how this happened." Her denials were unconvincing. Steele, experienced in reading people, recognized the cracks in Eunice's story. But Eunice, desperate to cover her tracks, lied. "I don't know," she insisted. "They were fine all day. They must have eaten something bad. Maybe it was allergies." Her story was full of holes, but she clung to it, unwilling to admit the truth. Back in the hospital, the unthinkable happened. Despite the doctor's relentless efforts, Nyla's heart stopped for the final time. At 9:34 p.m., she was pronounced dead. The cause: cardiopulmonary arrest brought on by toxic levels of oxycodone. The news shattered the medical team. One nurse wiped away tears as she adjusted the sheet over Nyla's small body. "She was just a baby," she whispered. In all this, where are the parents of the kids? Now in the investigation room, "Eunice," she said, leaning forward, "the toxicology report doesn't lie. We know they didn't ingest this accidentally. Someone gave it to them. We need the truth." Despite Steele's measured persistence, Eunice stuck to her story, insisting she had no knowledge of how the drugs ended up in the twins' systems. But her demeanor, a mix of nervous fidgeting and inconsistent answers, told a different story. Meanwhile, Steele's team was working tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Investigators interviewed neighbors, scoured Eunice's home for evidence, and traced the source of the oxycodone. It didn't take long to uncover a critical lead. Clyde Watson, Eunice's boyfriend, had obtained the drugs illegally through an old acquaintance. Witness statements and surveillance footage placed Clyde at a known dealer's residence just days before the twins fell ill. With this evidence in hand, Steele and her team returned to question Eunice. This time, the pressure was undeniable. "We know about Clyde," Steele said firmly. "We know he got the oxycodone. Did you know what he was planning to do with it?" At first, Eunice hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if looking for an escape. But as the weight of the situation bore down on her, she broke. Tears streamed down her face as she finally confessed. The tragedy marked the beginning of a storm that would unravel the web of lies, negligence, and betrayal that had led to this heartbreaking loss. And while one twin's life was gone, the others hung in the balance, leaving investigators with a race against time to uncover the full truth. The story began innocently enough, as so many tragedies do. DeAndre Andrews and Marissa Harper had always prided themselves on building a solid family foundation. Married for 7 years, their union had started as a whirlwind romance. But as the years went by, the pressures of life, parenting, and careers began to take their toll. The laughter and connection they once shared felt distant, buried under the weight of everyday responsibilities. DeAndre, a software engineer who often worked late hours, and Marissa, a nurse with grueling shifts, both realized they were drifting apart. Conversations grew shorter, and time spent together was often filled with silence rather than joy. In an effort to rekindle their relationship, they made a bold decision: a 2-week vacation, just the two of them. It would be an opportunity to reconnect, rediscover the spark they once had, and prioritize their marriage. The twins, Neela and Nia, were their world. At 5 years old, their playful energy and boundless curiosity brought life to the Andrews household. But with the upcoming trip, DeAndre and Marissa faced a dilemma. Who would care for their daughters? For months, DeAndre's mother, Eunice Carver, had been calling and asking to see the twins. "You never bring those babies to visit me anymore," she often said, her tone laced with guilt and frustration. "It's like you don't want me to be a part of their lives." Despite Eunice's insistence, DeAndre and Marissa had always been hesitant. It wasn't that they didn't love Eunice, she was family, but they knew she hadn't cared for young children in decades. Raising DeAndre as a single mother years ago had been challenging enough, and they weren't sure how she would handle two spirited 5-year-olds. The twins were a handful, always running, playing, laughing, and occasionally fighting, as siblings do. Their energy could be exhausting even for seasoned parents, let alone someone who hadn't been around young kids in years. Their hesitation grew stronger when Marissa privately voiced her concerns. "What if it's too much for her?" she asked DeAndre one evening. "The twins can be a lot. What if they overwhelm her?" But Eunice had an answer for everything. "If I could raise you, DeAndre, I can handle my grandkids. They're my blood. Why wouldn't I be able to care for them?" She insisted repeatedly that she was capable and reminded them of the joys of grandparenthood. Eventually, DeAndre and Marissa's resolve began to waver. They wanted their vacation, and Eunice's persistence made them feel guilty for even doubting her. In the end, they convinced themselves it would be fine. After all, Eunice had raised DeAndre, and he turned out well. Surely she could manage 2 kids for a couple of weeks. When the day came to drop off the twins, Nyla and Nia were bursting with excitement. "We're going to Grandma's house," they squealed, their backpacks full of toys and snacks. They hugged their parents tightly, but couldn't wait to jump into Eunice's car. Marissa and DeAndre, however, couldn't shake a lingering unease. As they drove back home after the drop-off, Marissa voiced her fears one last time. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. DeAndre sighed, placing a hand on hers. "She's their grandma, Marissa. She loves them. She'll be fine." Unbeknownst to them, that decision would change their family forever. The twins, thrilled at the prospect of spending time with their grandmother, had no idea of the danger that awaited them. For them, it was just another adventure. For DeAndre and Marissa, it was a chance to repair their bond. And for Eunice, it was an opportunity she had long demanded. A chance to prove she could still care for her family. But none of them could have anticipated what would happen next. The first day at Eunice Carver's home was everything the twins had imagined, and more. Nyla and Nia ran through the cozy bungalow in gleeful excitement, marveling at their grandmother's garden and the assortment of baked treats she had prepared. Eunice beamed with pride as she watched her grandkids devour cookies and giggle at her stories about their father as a child. For a moment, it felt perfect. Everything she had wanted when she begged DeAndre and Marissa to let the twins visit. But by the second day, cracks began to show. The twins' boundless energy soon overwhelmed Eunice. They raced through the house, knocked over a vase, and bickered over toys. "Nyla, stop pulling your sister's hair!" she shouted, exasperated. Moments later, Nia spilled juice on the carpet. Eunice, who had grown accustomed to a quiet, orderly life, found herself stretched thin. Adding to the strain was her boyfriend, Clyde Watson, a man she had met 3 years earlier at a neighborhood barbecue. Clyde, a semi-retired handyman, had a charismatic charm that initially swept Eunice off her feet. They bonded over their shared love of jazz music and evenings spent on the porch. But Clyde had his flaws. Known for his short temper and reluctance to adjust to change, he valued his routine above all else. When Eunice invited him to move in with her last year, he reluctantly agreed, provided their quiet life wasn't disrupted. The twins' arrival threw his world into chaos. The children's laughter and chatter grated on him, and their constant movement made the house feel smaller. Clyde's disdain became evident as he muttered complaints under his breath and retreated to his workshop to escape the noise. "I didn't sign up for this," he grumbled to Eunice one evening. "They're everywhere, screaming, fighting, running around. How are we supposed to live like this?" Eunice was torn. She loved her grandchildren, but she couldn't deny the truth. She was exhausted. At her age, managing two energetic 5-year-olds was far more challenging than she had anticipated. Clyde's frustrations only amplified her own, and by the third day, she was at her wits' end. It was during one of these moments of shared frustration that Clyde made a suggestion. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "there's a way to make this easier for both of us." Eunice looked at him, puzzled. Clyde continued, "I know a guy who can get us something, oxycodone, just a little bit in their juice. It'll calm them down, make them sleepy. You'll finally get some rest, and we'll have some peace around here." Eunice recoiled at first. "Clyde, that's medicine for pain. It's not for kids," she protested. But Clyde was persuasive. "It's not going to hurt them," he insisted. "Just enough to take the edge off. They'll nap longer, play quieter. Trust me, it'll make things easier for everyone." Desperate and worn down, Eunice reluctantly agreed. She had no idea how Clyde planned to acquire the drug, and she didn't ask. Clyde, ever resourceful, called an old acquaintance, a former co-worker who had access to prescription drugs through less than legal means. Within a day, Clyde returned with a small bottle of oxycodone pills, carefully hidden in a paper bag. The next morning, as the twins ate breakfast, Eunice hesitated, holding the pill bottle in her trembling hand. But Clyde, standing behind her, urged her on. "Just crush a little bit into their juice," he said. "They won't even notice." Eunice mixed the powder into the twins' drinks, her heart heavy with guilt. "This is just for today," she told herself. But as the hours went by and the house grew quieter, she convinced herself that it was the right thing to do. "They're calm. They're happy," she thought, ignoring the gnawing feeling in her chest. What began as a desperate attempt to regain control would soon spiral into a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The first dose of oxycodone seemed to have the desired effect. By mid-morning, both Neela and Nia were unusually quiet. They sat on the couch watching cartoons, their usual bursts of energy subdued. Eunice, overwhelmed with relief, allowed herself to relax for the first time in days. "See?" Clyde said, smirking as he sipped his coffee. "I told you it'd work." But by the afternoon, the effects began to wear off. The twins grew restless again, their usual energy returning in fits of giggles and playful scuffles. Clyde's irritation flared. "Did you even give them enough?" he snapped. "If you're going to do it, at least do it right." The next morning, Eunice doubled the dose. Crushing 2 pills into each cup of juice, she stirred the mixture until it dissolved completely. As she handed the drinks to Neela and Nia, she smiled faintly, masking her guilt with reassurance. "Drink up, girls," she said. "This will make you stronger and prettier." The twins, trusting their grandmother implicitly, took the cups without question. For the next 5 days, this routine continued. Morning and evening, Eunice administered the drug, each dose stronger than the last. At first, the results seemed promising. The twins grew quieter, spending long hours napping or lying on the couch. Eunice convinced herself she was helping them. "They're calmer," she told herself. "They're not fighting or getting hurt." But soon the effects of the oxycodone began to take a toll. Nyla, always the more energetic of the two, became sluggish. Her appetite disappeared, and she began complaining of stomach aches. By the 3rd day, she could barely keep her eyes open, even during the few hours she was awake. Her twin, Naya, started showing similar symptoms: loss of appetite, constant fatigue, and a pale complexion that seemed to worsen by the hour. Eunice noticed the changes but brushed them off. When Nyla clutched her stomach and said she felt sick, Eunice dismissed it. "You'll feel better after a nap," she said, waving her off. Nia's complaints of dizziness were met with the same indifference. The warnings were clear, but Eunice refused to acknowledge them. She had convinced herself that the children's behavior was just part of the adjustment to being in her care. Clyde, meanwhile, was oblivious to the twins' suffering, or perhaps he chose to ignore it. To him, the quiet house was a welcome change, and he had no intention of letting things return to the chaos of their first few days. On the 5th day, Nyla's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. She could barely lift her head from the pillow, and her breathing grew shallow. Nia, though slightly more stable, began complaining of chest pain. Eunice, panicked, hesitated to call for help. Clyde dismissed her fears, brushing off the symptoms as minor. "They'll be fine," he said. "You're overreacting." The evening of July 22nd began uneventfully, the kind of quiet Clyde and Eunice had hoped for. The twins, unusually subdued, were lying on the couch, their little bodies too weak to move much. Eunice had just settled into her chair when she heard a faint, laboured gasp. She turned to see Nyla, her face pale and her lips tinged with blue, clutching her chest. Within seconds, her small body convulsed and then collapsed onto the floor. "Clyde!" Eunice screamed, rushing to her granddaughter. Panic set in as she tried to shake Nyla awake, her voice trembling. "Nyla, baby, wake up! Please, wake up!" Clyde appeared in the doorway, his face frozen in shock. "What happened?" he barked, his tone sharp with fear. Eunice, cradling Nyla's limp body, shouted, "We need to call someone! She's not breathing!" For a brief moment, Clyde hesitated, but the gravity of the situation was undeniable. "Call 911, he finally muttered. That was how the twin arrived the hospital. She continued with her confession. "It was Clyde," she whispered. "He said the kids were too much, that they were ruining everything. He told me the oxycodone would calm them down, make them easier to handle. I didn't want to do it, but I didn't know what else to do." Detective Steele's face hardened, her frustration palpable. "So you crushed pills into their drinks, twice a day, knowing how dangerous that is?" As she recounted this, one of the detectives could no longer contain her anger. Her voice rose, questioning how the grandmother could do such a thing to her own grandchildren. But even in her frustration, she maintained her professionalism, letting the interrogation continue. Eunice nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "He said it wouldn't hurt them. I thought it would just help them sleep. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Help them sleep?" Steele's voice rose, unable to mask her anger. "You gave them doses that would harm a grown adult, let alone two small children. You didn't stop when you saw them getting sick. You didn't call for help until it was too late. How could you think this was okay?" As Eunice sobbed, she admitted to everything. The 5 days of administering the drug, her reluctance to stand up to Clyde, and her guilt over ignoring the signs that the twins were deteriorating. The confession was critical, but it didn't ease the weight of the tragedy. Nyla was gone, and Naya's life had been irreparably altered. Steele's team shifted their focus to Clyde, determined to hold him accountable for his role in the events that led to such devastating consequences. The investigation was far from over, but Eunice's confession was a grim turning point, a heartbreaking acknowledgement of the choices that had torn a family apart. When DeAndre Andrews and Marissa Harper received the call, the world around them seemed to collapse. They had been enjoying a quiet dinner during their vacation when the phone rang. Marissa answered, her cheerful tone vanishing as the words on the other end struck her like a thunderbolt. The doctor's voice was steady but grave. "Your daughter Nyla has passed away. Nia is in critical condition. We need you to come to the hospital immediately." Marissa dropped the phone, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as tears welled up in her eyes. DeAndre, alarmed by her reaction, grabbed the phone and listened in stunned silence. His knees buckled, and the weight of the news sent him crashing into a nearby chair. The guilt was immediate and all-consuming. Marissa's sobs filled the room as she cried out, "Why did we leave them? Why didn't we take them with us?" DeAndre, though trying to remain composed, couldn't hide his own regret. "We thought they'd be safe," he murmured, his voice cracking. "We trusted her. I trusted my own mother." The flight back home felt endless, the silence between them heavy with anguish. When they arrived at the hospital, they were met by Detective Cameron Steele, who gently explained what had happened. Each word felt like a dagger: oxycodone, overdose, negligence, betrayal. Marissa broke down completely, collapsing into DeAndre's arms as she screamed through her tears. She was supposed to protect them. How could she do this? How could she let this happen? DeAndre, though stoic on the surface, was shaking with rage and sorrow. He clenched his fists, his mind reeling with the thought of his mother's actions. In the hospital room, Nia lay hooked up to machines, her small body fighting to recover. Marissa rushed to her side, gently brushing a hand across her daughter's pale cheek. "Mommy's here," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." DeAndre stood by the doorway, his eyes fixed on Nia. His thoughts raced back to the moment they had dropped the twins off at Eunice's house. The way Neela and Nia had hugged them tightly, their laughter ringing in the air as they waved goodbye. He couldn't reconcile that memory with the heartbreaking scene before him. The betrayal cut deep. Eunice, the woman who had raised him, had done the unthinkable. The anger burned inside him, a mix of fury at his mother and disgust at himself for ever believing she could handle the responsibility. Marissa, still holding Nia, turned to DeAndre, her eyes filled with pain. "We trusted her. We trusted her with our babies," she said, her voice breaking. DeAndre nodded, unable to speak as tears streamed down his face. As Marissa clung to Nia, she made a vow in her heart. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I leave you in harm's way." Her voice, though quiet, was resolute. She kissed Nia's forehead, the weight of her promise etched deeply into her soul. The hospital room was filled with the quiet hum of machines and the muffled cries of two parents whose lives had been forever changed. The guilt, the sorrow, and the betrayal would haunt them. But in that moment, their focus was on Nia, protecting her, healing her, and ensuring she would never face such a nightmare again. The arrest of Eunice Carver and Clyde Watson came swiftly. Investigators had gathered enough evidence to bring charges against the couple, including child endangerment, manslaughter, and unlawful possession of a controlled substance. Eunice was taken into custody, her face etched with guilt and fear. Clyde, however, maintained an air of defiance, denying any involvement despite the mounting evidence against him. His attempt to feign ignorance fell apart when detectives presented phone records, witness statements, and surveillance footage linking him to the illegal acquisition of the drugs. During the trial, Eunice's defense attorney painted her as a frail, well-meaning grandmother who had been manipulated by her boyfriend. They argued that she was unaware of the dangers of the drugs and had only sought to calm her grandchildren, relying on Clyde's advice. She trusted the wrong person, the attorney claimed, pointing to her advanced age and lack of medical knowledge as mitigating factors. The prosecution, however, dismantled this narrative piece by piece. They highlighted Eunice's negligence, her failure to act as the children's health deteriorated, and her ultimate betrayal of trust. This wasn't ignorance, the prosecutor stated firmly. This was reckless indifference. She had 5 days to stop, to call for help, but she chose to prioritize her own comfort, and that of her boyfriend, over the lives of 2 innocent children. Clyde's defense, meanwhile, attempted to downplay his involvement, claiming that he never directly gave the children the drugs. But the evidence was damning. Testimonies from the drug dealer who provided the oxycodone and the trail of transactions leading back to Clyde left little room for doubt. He wasn't just complicit, the prosecutor argued. He orchestrated this plan and pressured Eunice into carrying it out. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was filled with tension and emotion. DeAndre and Marissa, seated together in the gallery, listened intently, their faces a mixture of grief and anger. Each detail was a reminder of the betrayal that had stolen one child from them and left the other scarred forever. When the verdict was finally delivered, the judge addressed Eunice directly. You invited those children into your home, knowing full well you couldn't handle them. You had options. You could have called their parents, ended their stay early, sought help, but you chose none of those paths. Instead, you acted in a way that directly endangered their lives. Eunice was sentenced to 4 years in prison, a decision that shocked many in the courtroom. Clyde received a slightly longer sentence of 5 years for his role in procuring the drugs and pressuring Eunice to use them. For DeAndre and Marissa, the sentences felt like a slap on the wrist. Marissa, unable to contain her frustration, shouted, 4 years? For taking my baby's life? For nearly killing my other daughter? That's justice? Her voice broke as she wiped away tears. They'll serve their time and move on with their lives, but my family will never be whole again. Many questioned how such a light sentence could be handed down for crimes with such devastating consequences. The community criticizing the justice system for failing to deliver what many saw as a fair outcome. The case also sparked a broader conversation about accountability and negligence in caregiving roles. Community debated whether Eunice's age and claimed ignorance should have been factors in her sentencing, or if they merely served as excuses for her actions. As the dust settled, one lingering question remained. Was justice truly served? Should the punishment have been harsher? The tragedy left the Andrews family fractured, struggling to piece their lives back together. Nia, though physically recovering, faced a long road to emotional and mental healing. Her once carefree laughter was replaced by quiet moments of fear and confusion. Therapy sessions became a routine part of her life, helping her process the trauma she was too young to fully understand. Marissa and DeAndre, while focusing on Nia's recovery, grappled with an unbearable void left by Nyla's absence. Every corner of their home held memories of their vibrant daughter, her playful energy now a haunting reminder of what they had lost. Marissa found herself replaying the moments leading up to their decision to leave the twins with Eunice. If only we hadn't gone, she would whisper to herself, the guilt eating away at her. DeAndre, too, was haunted by the betrayal of his mother. The woman who had raised him had taken away his daughter. The weight of that realization hung over him like a storm cloud, and though he wanted to move forward, forgiveness felt impossible. Their relationship, already strained before the tragedy, faced new challenges as they mourned in their own ways. Grief counseling helped them navigate the shared pain, but it was clear that rebuilding their lives would take time. The broader implications of the tragedy extended beyond the Andrews family. The case highlighted the dangers of trusting controlled substances in the wrong hands, especially among individuals ill-equipped to handle the responsibility of caregiving. It raised critical questions about the role of caregivers and the systems meant to protect children from harm. The importance of holding caregivers accountable became a central theme in public discourse. Many argued that Eunice and Clyde's actions were a cautionary tale about negligence and misplaced trust. Discussions about stricter regulations for prescription drugs and more rigorous oversight of caregiving situations gained momentum in the aftermath of the case. The story of Nyla and Nia Andrews is one of heartbreak and lessons painfully learned. It began with a family's desire for connection and rest, but spiraled into a tragedy that claimed one life and altered another forever. From the frantic moments in the hospital to the grueling investigation and trial, the tragedy unfolded as a devastating reminder of how quickly lives can change. The sentencing, which left many feeling justice was incomplete, served as a controversial ending to a case that shook a community. The lingering questions remain. What would you do in this situation? Could this have been prevented? And, most hauntingly, did the justice system fail Nyla and Nia? A family forever changed, a life lost, and justice that felt incomplete. Let this story serve as a reminder of the precious lives we are entrusted to protect. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay informed about stories like these, helping us shed light on the critical lessons they hold. Thank you for watching, and remember, our actions today can shape the lives of tomorrow.